but I will have it. So there we go.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give it just another couple seconds and then y'all ready? Anyone want to take a sip of water or anything before? Okay, you got your coffee, yeah. Big old chug of that.
Yep.
Actually, right at 4. Well, sorry, I keep saying 4. 4 my time, 8 yours, Adam. Ward, what time is it for you?
5.
Oh, okay, 5 for you. Okay.
I'm in the Midwest, so this is 10 o'clock.
Oh, it's 10 o'clock. Oh, okay. Sorry, I was thought. Okay, all right, I'm gonna start. Good luck. Break a leg.
Okay, looks like we are live. Hello. Hello, thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll just give folks a couple of minutes to join before we kick things off. But if you have joined and you're in the chat, let us know where you're tuning in from today. Where are you tuning in from today, Ward?
From Belgium,
From
like
Belgium.
my hometown, called Heist op den Berg. We recently built a new house, so I'm there. So it's fun to be in a new place. No more closet in the background anymore.
Yeah. And where are you tuning in from, Adam?
I am in Madison, Wisconsin, USA, so kind of near the Chicago area.
Oh, okay, lovely stuff. I'm in the UK by the seaside. You may or may not hear seagulls at any point. So that's what that is. Let's just see what's going on in the chat. Brazil, fantastic. The North Sea, Argentina. Poland, lovely stuff. Hello, everyone. Hello. Spain, Canada. Wow, this is a proper global audience.
We are all over the place.
Yeah,
France,
fantastic.
Canada, California, South India, Atlanta. Love it.
Hello, hello, everyone. So I had a question for you all while we wait for folks to come in. I have an answer prepared if you don't, but people in the chat, if Partytown was an actual location, where do you think it would be? This might be confusing looking at the chat because it could be where are you tuning in from or where do you think Partytown is?
Maybe it's both.
Ibiza, good
Both.
answer.
I'm tuning in from Partytown, yes.
Well, you're at Partytown HQ, presumably, Adam. You're at...
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll say that. I don't know, we just, I've got 2 younger kids, and then playing at the pool and stuff like that. I think of that as kind of Partytown.
Partytown is New York City. Yep. Partytown is Vegas. That's a good point as well.
I'd agree with that. It's a good answer. Somewhere near Gatsby verse. Nice.
Partytown situated near Opacity. Lovely stuff. That's very good.
That is pretty good.
All right, so I think we should probably get going in a minute. Let me just have a quick look over. Okay, so I've got a little bit of housekeeping to do as well, but we'll just start with some intros. So hello to everybody. I'm Paul Scanlon. I'm a senior software engineer and developer relations for Gatsby, and I'm joined by Mr. Ward Peters, principal engineer at Gatsby, leading the open source project, and Adam Bradley, Director of Technology at Builder.io. So today we'll have a walkthrough from Ward, which will explain how to use Gatsby's new script component powered by Partytown. And then Adam, you'll be giving us a bit more of a deep dive into how Partytown works. We have slides, we have demos, and we'll have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. So any questions you have, pop them in the Q&A window. There's a button, I think, somewhere at the bottom of your screen. So if you want to just ping your questions in there, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end. And then just as a reminder, we will share a recorded captioned video of today's talk with you via email, and that'll be sometime next week. So if you are ready, Mr. Ward, I shall hand it over to you.
Let me share my screen. Do you all see the slides?
I confirm I can.
Okay. So welcome all. So for the people who don't know what Gatsby is or what it does, so we are a very performant front-end framework for the headless web. What does this mean? Like, we aggregate data from any CMS that you have, like Contentful, Sanity, whatever you want, WordPress, and we try to optimize core web vitals. And here are a few pieces that we optimize by default. So we have great largest contentful paint using the Gatsby plugin image. We do network prioritization, making sure that fonts, images all get loaded before JavaScript, because we want to display what's necessary for your users as fast as we can. Then we are also doing like optimizing CSS by inlining it, minifying it. Same for JavaScript, to make sure that the bundles got split out correctly, all of those things, so you don't have to think about it. And then we also have a rich ecosystem of plugins where you can do like sitemap generation, so you don't have to know about how sitemaps work. You just plug it in, give it a configuration. It's all being done for you. The same goes for Contentful, Sanity, PWA, like lots of plugins, lots of things to plug in. And we try to do the hard parts for you so you don't have to. But today we're going to focus on the new script component that we have. The script component is basically a way to load any script. Like, there's different strategies. We have post hydrate, we have idle, and we have off main thread. All have their use case. Mostly post hydrate means something you want to run when React is done. Basically, as soon as the DOM is interactive. Then idle is, I want to run this eventually, but it doesn't really matter when, but I need it to run whenever the browser is not doing anything. And then the most fun one and the most interesting one is off the main thread, which we will talk about today. Is it off the main thread with Partytown? It's amazing what Adam and the Builder.io folks built, how it works and everything. So we're going to deep dive into that. And it's basically a way to reload script, like third-party scripts, but technically any script outside of the main thread, and it still works because it will be able to handle like all the things, as in like figuring out how big your screen is without sacrificing performance. So I'm first going to show you a demo what the value of the main thread would mean for your use case, and then afterwards Adam will do a deep dive on like how it works and so on and so on. So if I go to Gatsby Cloud, where I have set up a test project, so I have this built, and I'll zoom in a second. So this is a simple Gatsby site. It's one of our homepage starters that you can just try out yourself. It connects to Contentful. You don't have to think about anything. You get the project right away. And if I open DevTools, I go to my performance tab. I'll open it separately, zoom in so everyone can see what we're doing. I'll open this one by the side. I start recording, and I have set up in my GTM script. When I click sign up, I do a heavy third-party script or a heavy permutation, basically. So I don't know if this is going to work on this screen, but basically every click I did took 1 second. And you can see also in the at the top that it's like delayed. It's a long task, so it gets flagged by Lighthouse. So total blocking time and just the overall experience gets blocked by it. And this is just to show that it's slow. But if you look at third-party scripts, for example, things that watch where the user is on the page, like while scrolling. A lot of these scripts, they basically measure where you are, and they can take a long time as well. And if you have animations, they basically slow everything down. Now, if I go to the Partytown version of it, so the same site, everything is set up exactly the same. And now if I go back to the performance tab, I can click on it. Stop the profile. If I go back to what's happening here, there are no long tasks. Like nothing happened basically, but I think we have a worker where things are happening. I will go more deep into how this works. But basically now the main thread can still do whatever it needs. Animations can run without having any issues along the way. And how do we implement it? Basically, we go to or Gatsby site. I went to the also in here as well, and I'll probably change the theme to something light. Then if I go to components, I'll just look for layout. And I added these two scripts. So I have script to GTM, Google Tag Manager GTM. I have my ID, and I have strategy of main thread. So here I can say idle, I can say post hydrate. For this use case, we picked off main thread. And then I have another script called GTM init where I set up the boilerplate that's necessary for GTM. So data layer, I kick it off. And then on click, so I also go to my header, and on the on click of the CTA, the sign up button, I push an event called block, but this could be anything I want, and then GTM reacts to that one. And that's basically the script that kicks it off and takes 1 second to do something. That's roughly the demo I want to show to start with, and then at the end we'll go more into in depth into like how to debug and how to know that Partytown is working. Anything I need to show here for people to have a better understanding, or is it fine to continue?
I think it's cool how you've got the three different options. It's just as simple as changing, the strategy.
Yep. I guess I'll go back to the slides, and it's your turn, Adam.
Cool. So Partytown. So Partytown is kind of, we created this as a way to kind of solve what you were just talking about, where basically when you add lots of third-party scripts to a page, it has a lot of negative effects to that. So if you can go to the next slide, this is kind of a high-level overview of what's happening right now. So on the left side here, you've got your code and you've got third-party script code that's all competing on the main thread. And so there's this bottleneck that's happening of they're all kind of fighting for the different resources of basically the main thread. And so we don't know exactly what third-party scripts are doing, and we don't know how many that you've added. So it could be between, it could be just Google Tag Manager. It could be 20, 30 different scripts, which isn't unheard of. And then each one of those scripts, we don't know what type of DOM layout thrashing they could be doing. And so it gets kind of on a competition on the main thread of what should your code do or what should third-party script code do. And so on the right here is kind of the idea of like, look, the main thread should be dedicated entirely to your code, and the worker thread can be dedicated to the third-party scripts, where they will run a little bit slower, but that's actually perfectly okay, because really most third-party scripts are kind of asynchronous in nature. Facebook Pixel or Google Tag Manager is a great example of that, where really there's no UI happening. It's pretty much receiving events and then sending them off to the server. So that's asynchronous already in nature, where we do get it, those services need a timestamp, which is going to be accurate, but then posting it out, if it takes 1 or 2 milliseconds slower than what would have been on the main thread to post out that information, it really doesn't matter at that point. And so you can see it almost as a feature of having the third-party script slow down a little bit inside of the worker thread so that the main thread is dedicated to your own. So if you can go to the next slide here. So this is no surprise. This is a very typical script element. And what's happening here is because there's no type attribute, this is going to execute immediately, right? This is going to be blocking third-party script code that executes immediately. If you do add a type attribute of text/JavaScript or the more modern text/module, again, just like if you excluded the type, it's going to execute immediately on the main thread as fast as possible. But then if we go to the next slide, this is the big trick. This is basically, we do add a type attribute, but we give it a value that the browser doesn't recognize. And this is pretty common for if you wanted to do this with templates, you know, you would see this a lot in other frameworks back in the day. Or if you want to add in sort of JavaScript that you don't want to, I'm sorry, like some sort of JSON value, something like that. But this is pretty common that you can provide a type attribute where the browser is like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I do not know what text/Partytown is. Let's just skip over this script. It's not JavaScript. I'm not going to try to execute it. Let's do nothing with this basically, which is a good thing, which is we don't want to execute this code on the main thread. And then so the second thing of why this is nice is that now we have a query selector to find all of the scripts that we purposely skipped over. And so after your code has ran and has cooled off and everything is running fine in the main thread, that's when Partytown then kicks in and says, all right, the main thread's good to go. Their code is executed. Now it's time for Partytown to kick in and find all of the scripts that weren't ran onto the main thread. And then let's go and let's execute them on the web worker. And so that's how this happens. So again, two things are happening here. One, we tell it's the script not to run the main thread. And then two, it gives us a query selector for Partytown to find these scripts to run to the web worker. And what's nice about this way of doing it is that it really is an opt-in feature. So there is no automatic, let's look for Google Tag Manager and let's just magically try to decide to run this over. Let's find, right? There's no automatic anything happening inside here. It's entirely up to the developer to pick and choose which scripts should and should not run inside of Partytown, which again is kind of a feature because there might be some third-party scripts that you do want to run the main thread, or if they're very UI intensive, you know, you want them to run the main thread. And so this is again, so this allows you to pick and choose which one should and should not. Okay, so here comes the very next issue where if we were to execute this code into a web worker, the web worker is going to immediately say, I have no idea what document is, because if you're familiar at all with web workers, they're basically they're a background thread that has no access to the main thread or the UI. So it has no access to window or document. And so when you execute this JavaScript and you do document.title, the web worker is going to be like, what are you talking about? There's no such thing as document global. And this is the type of error that you get. And so this is kind of one of the big problems that Partytown has to solve, is that if we wanted to run third-party scripts into the web worker, most of them, pretty much all of them, are going to have some sort of window or document reference. They're going to, you know, document title is probably the easy example, but even if you think about adding an event listener or a get attribute, add a class, you name it, is something's going to happen inside what it would expect in the UI thread. And so this is where we have to make these kind of work for the web inside of a web worker.
Yeah, I think especially a good example here is like scripts like Hotjar, for example, that like look at like where are you on the page. They need to know what elements are visible and stuff. And I know that's an expensive call, first of all, if you don't do it right. And then it's also like you cannot do that from the worker because it doesn't know anything about the DOM.
Google Tag Manager, that does every single click. Basically, every single time you click a button, and then it crawls up the entire DOM and sends that information. So as I was building this, it's amazing to see kind of this stuff that it's doing. And so, you know, like one thing is
the expert.
Yeah, well, Well, unminifying someone else's code that's ready for production built for IE8, 500 kilobytes of it and trying to figure out why it doesn't work. That's not easy. It took a lot of debugging, and we've actually got quite a bit of console debugging. There's a debug build, and that was built for me to try to figure out what are these scripts doing. And then when you really do log out everything that you name it, whatever third-party script it is, like, wow, it's no wonder why it adds so much layout thrashing to your own app, because you see all of the things it's doing, and they're doing it very synchronous. They're not using like request animation frame and trying to gracefully get inserted. It's just like, let's block everything and let's just do my own thing. I don't care what the other scripts are doing. And that's, back to our point about the bottleneck, that's really what's happening, is that the more you add these scripts, they all are in their concerned about themselves. They run their own scripts. They're blocking your synchronous. And so that's really where a lot of this comes from, is that we want to try to, like, sure, you can do all that stuff, but let's kind of throttle you a little bit. Let's make sure when you're querying information, you're doing it in a request animation frame so things can cool off and you're not affecting the main thread. So let's see, let's go to the next slide here. And so this is kind of a visual of what's happening is. So we imagine we've taken all of Google Tag Manager, we've moved it to a web worker, and then we said, okay, execute, go ahead and run Google Tag Manager, and as if you were on the main thread. And somewhere inside that code, it's going to eventually hit document.title. This is where then we have the proxies that were added of, let's create this global called document. But instead of trying to recreate the entire DOM, and when I say recreate the entire DOM, think of something like, for Node.js, there's a project called JS DOM, right? So again, Node.js doesn't have the DOM, doesn't have window. And so JS DOM was created to kind of re-implement it so that it could run inside of Node. But it's an entire recreation of it. It's entirely, how would this work? Let's write some JavaScript of how document.title would work. Let's figure out how get attribute would work and all these different things. And so that's going to be at least, a megabyte, 2 megabytes of JavaScript to recreate how the browser works. We didn't want to do that. That's entirely kind of counterintuitive to, let's speed up third-party scripts by adding a 1 megabyte script. Right. And so that's not the idea. We wanted to make sure that it was able to stay extremely fast. And actually the entire build is about 10 kilobytes that's loaded into it from the web worker. So we can keep it pretty small and it's pretty fast. But the big point is that, like, because the web worker doesn't know what document is, and it also doesn't know what title is, it's always just, like, I received this command, let's forward it over to the main thread. I bet they know what that is. And let's get that information from the main thread and return that string. And so here's just an example of just like, Google or document.title was ran. It's like, no idea what you're talking about. Let's send the same information over to the main thread and let's execute on the main thread. The main thread's like, oh yeah, document.title, I know what that string is. And it gets that information and sends it back to the proxy. And then Google Tag Manager, the third-party script, then has the string. And so that's kind of how it's working here, is that anytime that there's an operation that happens what the JavaScript doesn't recognize, it basically proxies it and says, like, I don't know what you're talking about. Let's ask the main thread, and he'll tell me the information instead. So we can go to the next slide. So the next big problem is that the blocking calls. So this actually, all of this of what I've described is entirely possible. It always has been possible. Web workers have been around for over a decade, really. I think the last holdout was IE10, right? So web workers have been around for quite a while. So it's like, well, why wasn't this created a long, long time ago? This seems like a fairly obvious solution. Because if you don't have document, let's just go get the document information, return it. The problem is that it's a blocking call. So if you were in a web worker and you call document.title, we're sitting in the web worker, it needs to somehow communicate with the main thread. And no matter what we do, there's some sort of asynchronous jump between the two. So like I have to post a message from the web worker to the main thread, and the main thread has to listen for this message, get the information, and then post it back. And so there's kind of this asynchronous hop that needs to happen, which again is like, okay, so let's make some sort of way to patch this, which is also, again, entirely possible. And there's many projects out there, like was it ComWorker or
Comlink, I think.
Yeah, Comlink that does this, and it's great. And so like if you have very CPU intensive JavaScript that needs to run, this is a perfect example. The problem is that it needs to be asynchronous. And then the next problem is like Google Tag Manager isn't. It's not designed. This code that it has here, this example here, is not expecting a promise or a callback. It's expecting console log to have a string. And so because if I could go, and rewrite the entire world's third-party scripts to be asynchronous, any sort of every DOM operation to be asynchronous, then that's one solution. But that's just not going to happen. Because again, you can't just call up Google and say, hey, you need to rewrite your entire business to use asynchronous DOM operations. And so the requirement is like, we can't change third-party scripts. There's nothing we can do about it. We need to just receive the text and execute that in the web worker. And that's like a hard requirement of what we have to do. And so that's why we have to solve this blocking call problem. And this is kind of why it hasn't been something that's been covered in the past, is because like it needs to be blocking. So this enters the big trick. So as you can see here, basically we've got, again, the web worker. Sorry, Siri just kicked in. Again, we've got the web worker, which is receives a call of document.title. And here's the big trick, is that one thing that you can do inside of a web worker is call a synchronous XHR request. And immediately devs will notice like, well, that's bad. Synchronous XHR is bad. It's being deprecated. You shouldn't use that. And when we're talking about the main thread, that's absolutely true. You really, there's no excuse to be using synchronous XHR in today's world. It's being deprecated on purpose, because basically if it's synchronous, that means that everything is blocking until the response comes back. It's a legacy API that should be deprecated and should be removed from browsers. But in a web worker, that's kind of an entirely different story, because the web worker does rely on these calls. Specifically, import scripts is a widely used function that is very important to web workers, that it is synchronous. It is blocking it. It doesn't allow code to continue as it's downloading things. And a lot of reason of why things like StackBlitz or Code Sandbox or any sort of JS Fiddle, how they're able to work with web workers and being synchronous is kind of a big part of the API. And so sync XHR request is a huge part of workers and is not deprecated and is not being removed. And so I know that question comes up quite a bit. But this is kind of the big trick of how inside the web worker world, we can kind of stop everything. We can freeze time and we can stop and we can say like, hey, document.title is called. Let's just hold out for a second and let's do a synchronous XHR request to main. And so then the next trick is like, well, we have a thing called service workers that can actually intercept this request. So the web worker is like, hey, give me this information. Service worker is like, oh, I see you have a request for this. Let's get this information. And then the on fetch, which intercepts the request, then does a post message to the main thread, gets the correct information, and then does a post message back to the service worker, who then responds to the on fetch request, who then returns to the web worker. So we're kind of able to convert a synchronous call into an async. Meanwhile, the web worker is frozen, waiting for that information to come back. And so this looks like a lot. It actually is quite a bit, but you're talking, this is about a 1 to 2 millisecond hop to go in between everything, because it's actually not a real network request. One thing that developers will see when they use Partytown is that you see a lot of Proxytown network requests in the network tab. I wish they didn't show up there, because they're actually not network requests. They appear as they do. They get intercepted locally. It never hits the wire or anything like that, but it does show up in the proxy or in the network tab. But that's basically how we're doing it. So the big trick is that we're able to hang up the worker thread to continue to be blocking, get the real information, which will be synchronous or asynchronous to get the information, and then return it back to the asynchronous XHR. And so this means that we can basically run the code exactly as it is expecting, exactly as how the Google Tag Manager, or you name it, Facebook Pixel, Google Ads, all of them can work exactly as expected. Because as long as we just proxy all of the DOM, the things that it doesn't recognize, we'll be able to then have this proxy be blocking if it needs to be. And so that's kind of the big trick. And there's this is the service worker way, which is honestly, it's actually the fallback way. The more preferred way would be to use atomics. And we can probably, if you go to the partytown.builder.io website and read about atomics, it's actually really cool. I would love to use atomics as it is the default first, but it falls back to service worker. But to allow it to work has a lot of gotchas, and the website covers a lot of the gotchas there. But it's an interesting read. But really, the reality is the service worker trick is the one that's going to have to kick in for now.
I have a few questions about this because
Yeah.
this is really exciting.
Cool.
One thing I wonder is, did you get up one day and say like, yes, I found a solution, worker thread, service worker, main thread, this is how it works? Because now while you talk about it, it's like, yeah, sounds cool, not too difficult, but getting there is like, how did you come up with this solution?
What you don't see is like the thousands of failed attempts at this. Like one is like, I tried using import scripts, but then import scripts is going to execute immediately. I can't get it hooked into the proxy. The other is I tried using just web worker and just main thread, no service worker in the middle, or actually just a service worker and just a main thread. But when you emit or you do a fetch from a service worker, it doesn't intercept it. So that's why there's an additional hop there. That was what I was hoping to do. But yeah, there's a lot of failed attempts in this. And I think it came down to the original idea was using import scripts to be able to hang things up and then get the information. And then beyond that, like the iframes was really 90% of this project time involved, was trying to get iframes to work because specifically like the Twitter embed, which is a tweet, right? It's only so many characters. It's simple. It's just text. That Twitter embeds like 2-3 megabytes of code of iframes. And if you don't believe me, go to any website that's got an embedded tweet. It's amazing how much code they have. And they've got like 3 different iframes, and each iframe is talking to each other. And so that also caused lots of issues because if we're blocking in one thread and then it's got another iframe blocking, all of a sudden you get this deadlock happening. So that caused a huge refactor to make sure that we kind of have just the one web worker and then being able to not have these blocking calls, but it's able to reference each other like internally. And so there's a lot of trial and error, mostly error, to get this stuff to work. I think it came down to is like, it needs to be blocking. Like no matter what we do, somehow we need to be able to block. And like lo and behold, web worker has a way to do that. And it's like, all right, they have a way to block. How can we use that way somehow, some way?
And then the other thing I would like to ask is like on the main thread, do you do any optimizations, as in like if you do get bounding client direct or something, do you wrap it in a request animation frame or you just leave it alone?
Yeah, on the receiving end in the web worker, it does. So there's actually 2 optimizations. It does like kind of put it in a good flow of like the state of the main thread. So like, I think it's a request out of callback. We're able to get in the information. I forget how it listens to it. But the other is like what's actually very, very common with all scripts is like if you were to read inner width or client offset, some sort of dimension read, chances are the very next call is the height, right? Inner height and or screen height or whatever it is. So one optimization that happens is that if you were to call any one of those dimension calls, it's actually going to get all of them because according to the, if you think of the main thread, it has to do a layout. It has to do a full layout to make sure that it's accurate. And so at that time, it's actually the best time to actually to get all of them. Even if you don't use it, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to do more work. And so we're able to do, one big DOM read for all the dimensions, send it back to the worker thread. And there's pretty much a good chance, 99% chance that the very next call is the second DOM read. If you're doing lots and lots of DOM operations, you would imagine that it has to do so many hops back and forth. And so what it does, this is only required for a blocking read though, not for a setter. So any sort of getter or something like get attribute, that's going to go through this flow. But any sort of setter or like something like set attribute, that actually doesn't need to be blocking yet. And so if you were to, set a style, set attribute, set a class name, they're all kind of setting things. They don't need to happen that very moment. So if you do those three things and then you do a get attribute, that's when it's like, okay, we need to do it. It needs to be blocking. So then that's where it kind of batches up all of those commands in one and moves it all over all in one. So then on the main thread, it's going to be like, okay, set style, set attribute, get attribute. And so we're able to kind of optimize that a lot of trying to reduce the jumps in between the two, all the threads.
Yeah, that's super cool.
Cool. Yeah, and so this back to the service worker. Some of the service worker is what does the interception of those XHR requests. And again, like you'll see them in the network tab, which is sometimes useful when you're debugging. Is like, all right, why is this running so much, or why is this doing so much work? So I can give you a clue of what's happening. And another thing to point out is like, it's not doing, like this was always happening. It's just visual now. So all those operations were always happening. It's just that now you're able to see, all right, what are these scripts up to? And gives you a better idea. But then the other gotcha is because it's a service worker, the service workers have a hard requirement that it needs to be on the same origin or the same domain. So, so like a typical service worker is going to be sw.js at the root of the homepage. It can't be from a CDN. And so Partytown is the same requirement, whereas we'd love to have Partytown as a CDN library that you could just use from some CDN, but it can't be. It needs to be on your domain. And I think this is something that Gatsby can help out with, where it does copy the library files to the correct location so that you're able to use it on that domain and it has access to it. And then see the next slide here. The other gotcha that we have is that some third-party scripts you need to add CORS headers to. You need so like if you think of the traditional third-party script, you read their documentation, they tell you to add the script to the head, all right, append it to the bottom of the body. They give you some sort of like, this is how it works. And then just like JSONP or whatever technology, when you run a script tag embedded in your HTML, it doesn't need CORS. That's just kind of legacy web. Like that doesn't need to have the accept control headers CORS header for that script to work, even though it's from a different domain. And that's just how it is. But in our case, we're not executing on the main thread. We're executing it on the web worker, and the web worker needs to get that information by requesting it using JavaScript. And so then all of a sudden that requirement of like, you need to have CORS header if you wanted to use fetch or XHR request all of a sudden comes into play where it didn't in the past. Now, a lot of the scripts do have the correct CORS header, just like you'd expect on a CDN, but some don't, probably because they just never have had that requirement, because who is running our scripts in a web worker, right? So many don't. And I know the Google Tag Manager or Google Analytics, the older one, yeah, that one didn't have the CORS header, but they do have it now with GA4. And so it's already the recommendation well before any of this that Google wants you to move to GA4. So if you have that issue of like, I'm having to proxy my Google Analytics, you probably should be moving to GA4 anyways, because that's what they want you to do. And if you did, then you don't have this CORS header issues. But it's kind of, this is one of those things that I'd love to come up with a way around it. But then if we were to come up with a way around it, then browsers have a problem to begin with, because there's a reason for this security. So there's pretty much no way around it. The one is you got to ask our third-party providers that you need to add this CORS header because it is a CDN. It really is being requested from a different domain, that it's okay for them to do that. And then if that's not possible, this is where the proxying the request comes in. And again, if you go to Partytown's website, you can see a lot of information of why this is needed and how to do it. And I think Gatsby's got some solutions for it too.
I can take it over now with the Gatsby side of things. So Partytown, amazing, but it's also not complicated, but all the configuration you have to do, as in what you have to do by default, like it's all on the Partytown website. But if you use a script component, like I showed with off the main thread strategy, we take care of everything, like basically setting up the Partytown provider, setting up the web worker, making sure that the service worker is on the right domain, that it gets run. All of that is implemented by us. You can also enable an allow list in Gatsby config today, where basically it handles the proxy. So you can tell us, hey, these scripts or these URLs need the reverse proxy. And then we basically create a redirect rule that allows you to go to, like I'll show it in a sec because I forgot the path, but like underscore party proxy or third party proxy / and then the tag. And then we would do the reverse proxy for you. And then coming soon, not yet, Cloud will do that automatically for you. So you don't have to define the allow list anymore. But for now, you have to do it in Gatsby config, and Gatsby Cloud knows about it and figures it out for you. I guess then I want to first go to like showing a small as a demo of like debugging and everything, and then I guess we'll wrap it up with Q&A and some extra info from what Builder.io is doing.
Sounds good. Some good questions, yeah.
So let me first go to our website again. So this one, I think we can go into like how to debug. Like you said something about the network requests that are visible, and maybe it's a good idea to show it out as well. So I can clear this, click on sign up again, I guess. So now I've clicked on something and we can see all these Proxytown, Partytown network requests. I guess those are the ones you were talking about, that are not really network requests.
Right. And you see like the status code is from the service worker. That's been intercepted, so it didn't actually hit the network.
And then we see a payload. This is probably
and this is like the batching. So you see where I was talking about like, so it created an element. It adds the inner HTML, and then that last one is what's the last child? That's a getter, and that's where it's like, okay, this is a blocking information. Let's send those two setters and this getter all in one. And then the response is going to have the getter value of the last child.
We can see lots of these happening. So that's, I guess, GTM or Google Analytics. Like, I don't know. I think I set up GTM with Google Analytics. So it's probably Google Analytics trying to get some things from the DOM. But I guess if you see Proxytown and Partytown requests, you know it's working, is my guess.
Yeah, basically, that's the best way. In the service worker way, the atomics you wouldn't see, they're more silent. But again, probably go to the website to learn more about atomics. If you, regarding atomics like that, it's something that if you built a site from scratch, like brand new, I'm going to build a site, try to use atomics for sure. But it gets pretty difficult when it comes to the real world, where you try to use, CDN images and iframes, things like that. That to enable atomics, you need to disable a lot of cores or cross origin things, and so it makes it a difficult thing. But so really, reality is you're going to have to use a service worker way, and you can see it all happening here. And then the other thing that we could point out is that there's like a debug mode where it's a different build that's just console logs a lot of information. And you can, in your config, you can set what do I want to be able to show, because again, we proxy every single thing, and so it goes through our code first. And so because it's going through our code, we can actually decide to console logs like, hey, this script is calling this getter, and the value is this. And so here, there's a good example of all the information that's kind of coming back and forth that you can choose to log out, and that's just a debug mode. You probably don't want to do that in production, and it's just really useful. And especially again, like I use this for when we're testing out a new script and like, why doesn't it work? This helps show what is it doing and what DOM API did it try running that crashed. And so that's it's something that it's really, this is in an area that I'd love to get more help with the project, because this is a MIT licensed open source project. Anyone can use it. And so if you tried using Partytown with a certain service and it didn't work, trying to debug why that is, because it's more than likely it tried calling some API that wasn't proxied correctly. Because really Partytown is just one fancy big proxy that sends information. So it needs to operate exactly how the DOM works and send the data back and forth how it expect it to work. And so if something crashed, it comes down to is like, it didn't proxy this type of thing correctly. And so any sort of help we can get, this open source project can get of like debugging other people's scripts, the better. And so, yeah, file an issue, or even better, create a PR with the failing test, and you can, there's information on the site here of showing how to recreate tests and stuff. And that's really helpful for us to debug. And even better is try to go through our issues and try to solve some of the bugs, because this is again, a community project we'd love to get more help on.
Yeah, and that reminds me, I have to check in our code if we can enable debug mode for our users, because now everything is tucked away in the main thread. I need to check if there's a way in Gatsby config or something to enable debug mode as well, because that would help us and our users to also get the information.
Yeah, cool. I mean,
we can
really
create issues and pull requests for the project as well.
Cool. I was going to say that the debug, it really comes down to just making sure that the debug library files are copied over also, and then it's just a change to the path, add debug right before the other one, and so it's should be fairly simple to enable.
Yeah, sounds good. I don't know if there's anything else I would like to show here, because I think everything is happening with the Partytown. Let me see, too many things open. So I think this one. So we have also on application, you can see service workers, Partytown-SW should be running. So this is the Partytown service worker. So if it's running, you also know that it is working. And I think that's basically everything you need to know. And another way that I find useful, so because you are using GTM, I'm using GTM in this case, I should see a network request, I think.
Yeah, I think it's called collect.
Maybe it's not the right.
Oh, I think it's if you emitted something, it would be collect. But yeah, just the fact
now I
of
have
seeing
GTM. So this is what we do under the hood, because I enabled it as in like the reverse proxy mode for GTM. So then we create __ third-party proxy with the URL, and then we do the reverse proxy for you basically. But that's how you would set it up in Gatsby config today. So you set up plugins. So we have Partytown proxy URLs where you define the script, and then we do all the magic behind the scenes to do the course and everything.
Awesome.
That's why it doesn't say Google Tag Manager here, but the origin third-party proxy and then the URL that's happening. And then we add like access.
Yeah, adds the, yeah, there you go.
Because I don't remember if GTM has it by default. I know GTag, the Google Analytics v4 has it, but I don't know if GTM has it by default.
I don't remember
think,
either,
Paul,
actually.
we can go into Q&A.
Hello. Yes. Excellent stuff. Lots of great questions, actually. Do you mind if I pick some of my favorites and we'll see, we'll go from there. So a good one came up a few times, actually, and this probably applies to both Partytown and script component, which uses Partytown, but is Partytown stable enough to use on a production website?
That's always that's a tricky one. I would like to think so, but at the same time, I would be very cautious to just turn it on a Friday evening and walk away, and then come to find out a week later that none of your analytics work. That's not that far-fetched. That could actually happen. So it really is. That's also why the opt-in feature is nice. I I really would encourage, like, if you want to do that, do it gradually, and definitely look at your real world data to make sure that it hasn't like crashed and like something is going through. And so I label it as beta because, I don't want to say, oh yeah, it works, just enable it and then magic will happen. It is still, work in progress. And so I wouldn't recommend it for Amazon.com to enable it today, but certainly pick and choose scripts, enable them, and work with your marketing and analytics department to make sure that stuff is coming through as expected, and you can slowly keep migrating them over. And that's what I would say for today. And then and if you come across something not working, that's again source project. We'd love to get your help of like pointing out why didn't it work, recreating that error and really recreating a very minimal example of what didn't work and what we need to fix in the next release.
Great. And then I suppose
what I would say as well is like be careful with like GTM, Telium, like those tech containers, because that's where marketeers can add scripts without engineers knowing, and that's I think where the most problems can arise. Like if you gradually change your scripts, like Adam said, you have control, so you know what script you're changing. But if you put GTM or Telium or whatever tag manager into Partytown mode, basically every script that's runs in GTM runs in Partytown, and there's no way to, or there might be a way, but I don't think there's a way to move that piece back to the main thread.
I don't know if that's solvable. That would be a great one. That'd be a great feature. Specific, I mean, tag manager is used by everyone. If they were able to pick and choose the tag manager stuff too, would be nice. But I don't know how that would, if that's possible.
On the topic of picking and choosing scripts, someone has asked, how does this all work with scripts that are trying to append things to the document?
Yeah, and so this same thing is that if the script is running inside of the web worker and the script says create a script and let's append it to the head, that's where it's the one extra trick. It's like, I know what you're up to. Like let's just do this right now inside of the web worker. Otherwise, going through the whole dance of going back and forth is essentially the same thing. And so you can create divs and buttons and whatever you want, HTML elements, and append them to the DOM. That's going to work just fine. Same thing as you can create a script, give it a inner HTML or give it a source and append it to the head. Partytown still knows what to do. Is like this shouldn't get executed in the main thread.
Okay, good answer. Another one here, and you sort of covered this, but there was a couple of questions that came in with regard to if the worker thread makes requests to the main thread, how is that it doesn't block the main thread when it does that request?
So the web worker has a synchronous XHR, and so that web worker is basically paused for a moment. But when it gets to the on fetch, it uses a post message, which is asynchronous. And then the main thread's like listening for like, oh, someone's asking for information. Let's get it and let's post it back. And so that is not in a blocking flow where it's able to, gracefully listen for your event when it's ready and then gracefully respond when it's went. So like it doesn't cause as much, as many issues basically, because we're able to put it into a nice flow of all the information of how it's going through. And then the next thing is, sorry, I lost my train of thought with that last part. I think there was a question like, how is it not blocking? It's like the other big thing is that all of that code is executing on the web worker. So all of the thought process that's going in that script is happening. Majority of Google Analytics is just straight up JavaScript code that's running. And a few times it's accessing the DOM. And then the other thing is the network request itself is happening inside of a different thread. And so additional requests that it's making, any, beacon sending that it's doing to a different service is happening into the web worker. And so that's another big thing is that all of those resources and that script, the memory for that script, all of the network requests that are happening is not in the main thread. And that's the big difference.
Mm-hmm. And another question we've got, can a site still have its own service workers with Partytown?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing that if you look at the, what we were showing earlier is that the service worker is under a different scope, is what service workers call it, where it's actually under /tilde Partytown. And so you can have your own wherever you want it. More than likely, it's going to be at the root, called something probably like sw.js. So your site can have 2 service workers. Yours takes precedence. Hopefully you don't have a directory called tilde/Partytown. If you do, I apologize, but that's the one we're going to use for this service worker. And yeah, so you can have your own, change it all you want. They're completely disconnected from each other.
Fantastic. And then last question before we wrap things up. Where do you see Partytown heading in the future? What's on the roadmap?
On the roadmap, one thing that's been a lot of fun is I have been fortunate to have a lot of conversations with, some performance engineers, the Chrome team, things like that, where it'd be great that there's a lot of things inside of Partytown that could be provided by the standards, so there could be quite a bit of code that could be removed. And so the one that I would love the most, that again, this is, a dream that's not going to happen tomorrow, but what I would love to see in the standards is there is a thing called document.implementation.create document that exists in the main thread today. And it basically creates a fake document that you can mess around with and you can change all you want. It's the entire DOM implementation, but it's not the real document and it's not the real window. It's the one that you create an instance of in memory. If we could put that inside of a web worker, that would drastically reduce how much work Partytown has to do, because we would basically have a DOM implementation that we would use. And so a lot of those, and even global constructors like HTML collection, node list, things like that, they're constructors that are very useful to the web worker. That would be nice to see in the web worker too, but they're not there. Some things, a lot of WebGL, a lot of those constructors are actually, they are in the web worker. And so it seems like there's been this newer trend that a lot of constructors are showing up in both. And so, yeah, in the future, I'd like to see a lot of standards embracing, being able to do these types of tricks, not even tricks, but just embracing it, that allow the web worker to have these constructors and have this DOM implementation in it.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. Right. Thank you so much, Adam and Ward. It's been brilliant. We did have some remaining questions, which I don't think we're going to have time for, but what is the best way for folks to contact you if they have any questions, Ward and Adam?
Yeah, for me, it's a Twitter handle, WardPeet, WARDPEET on Twitter, or it's basically my handle anywhere. Like, we also have GitHub discussions on the Gatsby repo, so you can always ask questions about script component or anything Gatsby related. So you can find me there.
And then Partytown related, we have a Discord, and if you go to the Partytown site, there's a good link to it. There's quite a bit of questions and activity on there. I'm not able to answer everyone's questions. I do my best to do it, but if you have a question, you need help, definitely go to the Partytown Discord there. Also, there's a discussion on GitHub, on the GitHub repo. There's a discussions there, which also getting other people's help there would be amazing. Being able to even improve the docs would be amazing. So any help you can have with the open source project would be awesome. And then my Twitter is @AdamDBradley. So you find me on there. Feel free to ping me and whatever. And then, yeah, so the other thing is, I work for Builder.io, which is basically a drag and drop, being able to build your React app or your Gatsby app with a visual CMS editor. And so this all came about, Partytown came about because no matter how fast we can make Builder, Gatsby, whatever, any website, you name it, no matter how fast you can make that website, at some point you need to add third-party scripts. And that's usually something that's completely out of control. It's not fair, and you're going to lose the argument to say, well, we can't run third-party scripts, because the reality is it's a big organizational decision. And so Builder.io, we started this project for this reason. It's just like, look, we can make these pages as fast as possible, but reality is a lot of these sites still need third-party scripts, and there's nothing we can do about it. And so that's why we created Partytown, is to try to solve it for a lot of our customers and really a lot of the users. And so So yeah, take a look at Builder.io. It's something you could, again, a visual CMS you can add within Gatsby, and allows you to have your designers and marketers be able to edit the page, do A/B testing, things like that, while the developers are just focused on the components of their Gatsby sites. Is kind of the big difference. So it allows you to focus on your components and allows the marketers and designers to focus on the visual aspects of the page.
Great stuff. So yeah, thanks again. Thanks, Adam. And thanks to everyone who joined. Just a final bit of housekeeping from me is just to remind you that the talk has been recorded and it will be going out with captions. You'll get an email with the email that you registered with sometime next week. And also just keep an eye on the Gatsby social media. We've got another webinar happening August 11th. Details will be coming shortly. So yeah, thanks ever so much to everyone for joining.